What's going on, everybody? This is Andre here, filling in for Kevin, and in this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the Umidigi G3 Max. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now before we get into the phone itself, let's take a look at what comes in the box. So definitely a real nice box here, and taking a look inside, we got a little case here. Now keep in mind, this is definitely more of a starter case. It is pretty thin, so if you are someone who likes to keep a case on your phone, although this is definitely better than nothing, considering at this point in 2023, most phones don't come with anything like this. I would recommend getting something maybe a little bit more heavy duty, just to maximize the protection. We also got a typical quick start guide here, a USB wall adapter, a SIM card removal tool, and a charging cable. So definitely a decent amount of stuff here. I do appreciate that it does come with a case because, again, at this point in 2023, the vast majority of phones are not going to come with that. Even when it comes to stuff like a wall adapter, that is getting a lot less common. So definitely nice that we get one with this phone. Now moving on to the phone itself. With the Umidigi G3 Max, we're getting a pretty large 6.6-inch LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 400, and a 20.06:9 aspect ratio. Now, one thing I do want to point out here is that on Umidigi's website, they do say this phone has a 120Hz refresh rate, but as you can see in the phone's display settings, this is not exactly accurate. Now, I don't know why they actually say it like this, but keep in mind, when they say this phone has a 120Hz display, it's more about the sampling rate, so compared to your average 60Hz phone, the screen is going to be a bit more sensitive, but keep in mind when it comes to the smoothness of the scrolling and stuff on the display, it's definitely not bad, but at the same time, it's not going to have that super smooth premium feel like you would expect with an actual 120Hz display. But aside from that, I do think for what it is, the display is actually really good here. At 6.6 inches, it is definitely on the larger side, so if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, whether you're doing stuff like reading or scrolling through social media, or watching videos, looking at photos, playing games, pretty much anything is going to show up real nice here. With the 1080p resolution, we're also getting a nice sharp, crisp image. And this is one thing that I do think is pretty impressive with this phone because keep in mind, you can get this phone for well under $200. And in this price range, while it's definitely not rare per se, a 1080p resolution is definitely not as common. In fact, I've seen phones that are even quite a bit more expensive than this that only have 720p displays. So if you are looking for something really affordable, but you do consume a lot of content where the image quality is a bit more important, like watching videos for example, then for that kind of use, this phone will be a great choice. And in addition to this, with a 20.06:9 aspect ratio, we are getting a pretty tall and narrow form factor here. So if you're in landscape mode doing stuff like looking at photos or watching videos, you are going to get a nice cinematic look. Things are going to be a lot more immersive. And if you're doing something like browsing the web or using social media, with a form factor like this, you can fit a good amount of content on the screen without having to scroll too much. And when it comes to the display technology, despite having an LCD display, which it's really nothing special with this phone, but despite this, the colors still look good, the display is decently bright, and the viewing angles are actually surprisingly decent too. That being said though, keep in mind, as with pretty much any phone like this, if you're outside in direct sunlight, or really in any kind of super bright area, compared to something like an AMOLED or an OLED, this display could be a bit more difficult to see. So definitely keep this in mind. Now for storage, with the Umidigi G3 Max, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so definitely plenty of storage here. For the average user, you're probably not going to have to worry about running out of space here because in general, while there are of course people out there who use tons of space, for most people if you just have a few apps here and there and you're doing stuff like web browsing, social media, taking a few photos and videos every now and then, you really don't need that much space. And even if you are taking maybe a lot of photos and videos, for example, maybe you have lots of music and stuff like that, you can always offload that stuff onto a microSD card, and that will save even more space. And especially in this price range, for such an entry-level device, you typically don't expect to get this much storage. I mean, I've seen phones around the price of this one that have like 32GB. So for what it is, the storage on this phone is definitely impressive. Now for security features, the Umidigi G3 Max does have Face Unlock, as well as a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So definitely nice to get both options. Not that it's really rare or anything, but I have seen plenty of phones, even higher end ones for that matter, that only have one or the other. And in this price range, it's even possible to have neither. So in general, it's always nice to have multiple options besides a pin to unlock your phone. But real quick, let's give the fingerprint scanner a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the Umidigi G3 Max, up front, We got a water drop notch design for the selfie camera. Maybe not the best looking. I feel like at this point in 2023, water drop notches are starting to look more and more outdated, and I feel like the hole punch design is a lot better. But in the overall context of the phone, I guess it's not really that bad. Now this camera is 8 megapixels, and then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. Now I kind of have mixed feelings about this because on one hand, in this price range for such an entry-level phone, you don't really see a ton of 50 megapixel cameras. So although considering this is a first impressions video, I haven't actually used the camera yet, I am definitely expecting the photo quality here to be at least decent. On the other hand though, despite having a pretty impressive 50 megapixel main camera, the camera setup we're getting here is honestly relatively featureless. Now, in this price range, do I really expect a ton of different features and maybe a fancy telephoto lens or whatever? No, definitely not. This is a really entry-level phone after all, but keep in mind, even with really entry-level devices like this, usually they have at least an ultra-wide camera or a macro camera, maybe not necessarily both, but definitely one or the other. But unfortunately with this phone, we're getting neither feature. So if you are taking a lot of pictures and you want a wider variety of features, then you might be a little disappointed here. But if you're really just taking regular photos every now and then, and you really just need the option to get a nice photo when you need to, then I do think the camera we're getting here will at least get the job done. And keep in mind for video, we are getting a max recording quality of 1080p in the rear camera, but only 720p in the front. So if you're recording lots of videos, then you're definitely going to want to go with something else, especially if you're using social media a lot. I know for stuff like Instagram, for example, you might want to get a better selfie camera, but if you're really just recording the occasional video every now and then, maybe for something like Snapchat, for example, where the quality isn't super important, then it will at least get the job done. Now for the RAM and processor, with the Umidigi G3 Max, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Unisoc T606 processor. Now overall, in my experience, this phone is not slow per se, but performance-wise, it's definitely not the fastest either. And I have noticed this isn't really specifically related to the processor. Part of it could be the software too. But sometimes when you're scrolling through the home screen and just using the phone in general, it can feel a little bit sluggish. So in general, in my experience so far, it definitely hasn't been too bad. And for an entry-level phone, I actually think it's pretty decent, since after all, I have seen quite a bit worse. But just keep in mind, if you're going to be on your phone a lot and you're really going to be using it like a power user, if you're doing stuff like heavy social media use, or maybe high performance mobile gaming, for example. Maybe you're using your phone for work, or maybe you're just someone who's on your phone a lot. In that kind of situation, you might want to get something with a better processor, because while it is decent enough to get the job done for more light use, the phone in general is really just not that fast. And this phone also does not have 5G connectivity, so definitely something else to think about, because at this point in 2023, while you still can definitely survive with a non-5G phone, I feel like if you're going through the trouble of getting a new phone anyway, you might as well get one that's compatible with your carrier's latest and greatest network. And since 5G is definitely not going anywhere, if you really want to future-proof things, I feel like getting a 5G phone is definitely a good choice. That being said though, if you're really just looking for something basic and you're not really that concerned about having 5G connectivity, then again, 4G phones at this point are still perfectly fine, so you should at least get by. Now I ran a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise compared to your current device. Because of course, depending on what you're coming from, it may or may not actually be an upgrade, and I imagine if you're getting a new phone, you want to get something that's probably at least a little faster than your current device. But I will say, on one hand, compared to a lot of other phones in this price range, at least based on the benchmark scores, I feel like this phone is at least a little bit faster. And in general, for what it is, with a single core score of 376 and a multi-core score of 1406, it definitely is pretty solid. That being said though, again, if you're really going to be using your phone a lot, it's still not that fast. But if you are coming from maybe a lower end device, then chances are this phone could still be a pretty good upgrade. For the battery, with the Umidigi G3 Max, we are getting a 5150 mAh battery, so definitely a great battery here. If you are looking for something that has really good battery life, maybe you're not always around a charger, but you still need to use your phone all day, for that kind of use, this phone will be a great choice. And then down the road, as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, you're not going to notice it nearly as quickly with this phone as you would with a much smaller battery. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer time without having to replace it, getting a phone like this that has a really large battery will definitely be great for that. But keep in mind, in case you're expecting this feature, the Umidigi G3 Max does not have wireless charging, and while in general that's not a feature you typically find in phones in this price range, if you're coming from maybe an older flagship phone, for example, that does have wireless charging, and you're expecting pretty much every phone in 2023 to have it, then again, keep in mind, unfortunately, at this point point at least, that's not the case. So if you do want wireless charging, you will have to get something else. Now for the software, the Umidigi G3 Max does have Android 13, so definitely great to see there. On one hand, at this point in 2023, since we're over halfway through the year now, you might expect every phone to have Android 13, but keep in mind when it comes to these really entry-level phones, sometimes they only have Android 12 or whatever the previous software is at the time. So if you are looking for something like this that's really on the affordable side, but you still do want the latest software, then again, keep in mind this phone does actually have Android 13, so definitely a great choice. Now as far as other features go, keep in mind this phone does not have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, you will want to get something else. And while on one hand, considering this phone is, again, a really entry-level device, this isn't really that surprising. I feel like at this point in 2023, seeing how tap and pay is becoming more and more popular and widely used as time goes on, it definitely is disappointing to have to miss out on. And even if you don't currently use NFC, you may end up wanting to try it in the future, and of course, if you have a phone that doesn't have the feature at all, then you won't even get that option. So in general, if you do see yourself ever using tap and pay, then you will want to get a different phone. But now that we've gone over a lot of different specs and features about this phone, let's take a closer look at the hardware. On the left side here, we got the slot for the SIM card and the microSD card. On the bottom, we got the microphone, USB-C port, and the speaker. On the right side, we got the power key, which again does double as a fingerprint scanner. Volume down, volume up. On the top, we got the noise cancelling microphone, 3.5mm headphone jack, which I didn't even notice it up here at first, but I am glad to see we have this option. So if you do have a normal pair of wired headphones, then keep in mind, you can use them with this phone without an adapter. Then on the back, we got the camera module, flash, Umidigi branding, and that's pretty much it. Now, I really do like this material on the back. At least aesthetically, it looks pretty cool and kind of has this leathery feel. It's definitely not leather, but it does give it a unique look and texture, and you definitely can't see fingerprints really at all here. So if you are looking for a phone like this that has a bit more of a unique design, then this phone will definitely be a great choice. That being said though, when it comes to the overall materials, first of all, as you would probably expect from a phone like this, aside from the glass display, it is made entirely of plastic. But I feel like even compared to other phones like this, the plastic here just feels a little bit cheaper. The phone really doesn't have a lot of weight to it. So although I feel like, in my opinion, it does look pretty nice for what it is, when you're actually holding the phone, it does feel just a little bit more on the cheap side, so I definitely recommend getting some kind of case for this phone. Luckily, again, it does come with one, but you might want a bit more of a case, because again, the case it comes with is definitely on the thinner side. And although no one plans on dropping their phone, if you drop this phone, I feel like it might not do as well as a lot of others, so definitely something to keep in mind. Another thing I do want to mention is this phone does come with a screen protector. You can kind of see it right here if you look really closely, but it's really not very noticeable, which is actually a pretty good thing because, first of all, on one hand, of course, a screen protector will protect your screen quite a bit more, helping the phone last a bit longer. But on the other hand, sometimes screen protectors can get in the way, make the phone a bit harder to use, and sometimes even bubble up, and that can be annoying too. But with the screen protector that comes with this phone, you really don't get that. So in general, definitely a net benefit here. But in conclusion, my overall first impressions of the Umidigi G3 Max. Now overall, I feel like on one hand, there's really nothing super spectacular about it that stands out a lot. But on the other hand, if you are looking for a really affordable device for more basic activities, this device definitely has some qualities that do make it a pretty good choice. First, the display, again, is really good for what it is. In this price range, again, a 1080p display, while definitely not being rare, is still quite a bit less common than 720p. So again, if you are consuming a lot of content, especially stuff like videos, for example, where the image quality is a bit more important, you will get a real good experience with this phone. It also has a ton of storage, a pretty nice 50 megapixel camera, a really large battery, the latest version of Android, and while the performance again is not necessarily the best, for more average light use, it is at least good enough to get the job done. But this concludes my first impressions video on the Umidigi G3 Max. For the latest info on pricing and availability, we will be linking to that in the video description, so definitely check that out. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Again, this is Andre here, and I will see you in the next video.